Welcome to the Hill Update. I'm your host, Dean Allison. So what happened in Ottawa this week? Well, plenty as usual. Two specific issues stood out most. First, the government was caught using Liberal Party partisan resources to vet federal judges. When concerns were first raised about the integrity of the government's judicial appointments process, Justice Minister David Lametti said, "There is no partisanship in my decision-making process." Through media reports, however, it now comes to light that the Justice Minister may have misspoken. The government was using the Liberal partisan database called Liberalist to select judges, ensuring a link between some appointments and donations. The Globe and Mail, La Presse, and CBC News published articles demonstrating partisan considerations in the judicial appointments process. The Tories and the Bloc have accused the government of favoring candidates with a history of donating to the Liberal Party. The practice was criticized by both opposition parties and legal experts. Given a private party database was used in government-making decisions, media reports suggest that the government has now stopped the process. In 2015, the government promised a merit-based judicial appointment process. The facts speak for themselves. The Justice Minister appointed his own campaign donor to be on the bench and attempted to appoint another with a now deleted tweet. On Twitter, Lametti announced 3 appointments, one of whom was Montreal lawyer Daniel Urbis. Urbis was appointed to the Quebec Superior Court. This Twitter announcement was subsequently deleted. Lametti and Urbis are both graduates of McGill University's law school. In 2014, Urbis contributed $1,200 to Lametti's campaign for the Liberal nomination. The following year, Urbis made another donation of $1,000 to Lametti's Federal Liberal Association. The appointment of Urbis to the bench would have been the second judicial appointment of an individual who donated money to Lametti's nomination contest. CBC reports that last year, Lametti appointed lawyer Philippe Boulanger to the Quebec Superior Court. In 2014 and 2015, Boulanger contributed $1,400 to Lametti's nomination campaign and another $1,500 in 2018 to Lametti's Liberal Riding Association. What's more, according to the data for the National Post, just over 1/4 of the judges appointed by the government, about 28%, have been people who have solely donated to the Liberal Party of Canada. This compares to 4% who were solely Conservative donors and only 1% who were solely NDP donors. It's important to note that the president of the Canadian Bar Association told the National Post that political donations in and of themselves are not the problem for judicial appointments. He adds that while the judicial advisory committees do strong work assessing the candidates, the government could be more transparent in showing it respects the work that the committees do. The second item of this week's update is once again Bill C-10, perhaps one of the most anti-free speech, anti-internet bills by any Canadian government. Experts from around the country, academics included, have come out very strongly against this bill. Michael Geist, the law professor at the University of Ottawa, had this compelling statement about the secretive amendments that were recently hurried through committee by the government. In some ways, it's indicative of, frankly, how the Liberals have handled this bill, almost from the get-go. You've had a minister unable to effectively communicate the contents of it. You've had a provision pulled back, which clearly has sparked enormous amounts of concerns across the country. And now, in the rush to try and get this legislation through without any real debate, and it oversteps the very boundaries of the committee. And especially for the government, which came to power arguing that it was going to give more power to committees and leave them more independent. To see them rebuked in this way by their own speaker is, I think, quite telling. The government, along with the Bloc and the NDP, seemed uninterested in listening to arguments on how this bill could hurt free speech and the continuing its expedition through Parliament. In fact, the government shut down debate on Bill C-10 in committee, a tactic that hasn't been used for more than 20 years. Because of these maneuvers, critics are saying that the government is trying to silence the voices of those who disagree with them, both online and in Parliament. Conservatives have been saying, we are calling on Justin Trudeau to withdraw Bill C-10. If this is not done, a Conservative government will stand up for Canadians and repeal this deeply flawed legislation. While the NDP and the Bloc may look to other ways of freedom of expression, Canada's Conservatives will not. Joining me on the show this week is Michael Barrett, who's an MP for Leeds, Grenfell, Thousand Island, and Reeder Lakes. He was first appointed as the Shadow Minister for Ethics in 2019 and reappointed under Aaron O'Toole. When we come back, we'll talk to Michael. Welcome back to the Hill Update. Joining me on the show this week is Michael Barrett, the MP for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes, and also the Shadow Minister for Ethics. Michael, you were appointed by Mr. Scheer and then reappointed by Mr. O'Toole. So you obviously have ingrained yourself in terms of someone that's very credible and somebody who can talk about these issues. Let's just jump right into it. I mean, we've got a Prime Minister that has now, I think, been rebuked by the Ethics Commissioner, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Talk to us a bit about what's going on with your role as the Shadow Minister for Ethics.
Thanks very much. Appreciate you having me on, Dean, and of course appreciate having the opportunity to work with you in caucus as well. And this role, while everyone's very busy, this one is a particularly busy file. And we've got in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, look, this guy has a belief that the rules don't apply to him. And that's not my opinion. We saw with the Trudeau Report 1, that came from an officer of Parliament, the Ethics Commissioner. That's where the Prime Minister was found guilty of breaking multiple sections of the Conflict of Interest Act. That's for his trip to Billionaire Island. We had in the Trudeau Report 2, again, the Prime Minister found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act. That was for his attempted interference in the criminal prosecution of his friends at SNC-Lavalin. And then he was investigated again, and members of his cabinet were found guilty of breaking the act where he was investigated in the Trudeau Report 3, and that was with the WE scandal. But all around this Prime Minister, Dean, we have ministers like the now President of the Queen's Privy Council, who was found guilty of contravening the act, breaking this law. That was the scandal known as Clam Scam. His former finance minister, who we fired last summer amid the WE scandal, found guilty of on multiple occasions of multiple breaches of the act. And then members of his caucus have found themselves to have broken both the Conflict of Interest Code for members and broken the act. So really, when we look at 6 years in, a Prime Minister who famously said in 2013 that it's hard it's hard to have confidence in your government when there's a new scandal every day. My goodness, that's Justin Trudeau. I think he took that as a challenge, and he had seen what I look fondly on now is years of good ethical governance under a conservative Prime Minister. And now we see, my goodness, this Prime Minister who finds himself in the international headlines every few months with himself or a member of his inner circle involved in unethical dealings.
So for those that don't really understand what an ethics commissioner is and a code of conduct and all that stuff, would you just sort of walk people through what exactly does this mean? Like, I mean, is it really just as basic as making sure that you don't try and benefit yourself because of your job or get benefits that you wouldn't normally otherwise? I mean, explain to people what the ethics commissioner does and why this code is in place.
Yeah, so there's 2 sections. So all members, there's 338 members in the House, and we're all subjected to a code for members. And then cabinet ministers, designated public office holders, so senior people in government, they're subjected to the Conflict of Interest Act. So an additional set of rules based on their senior role in government. And like you said, Dean, this is to make sure that members aren't benefiting themselves, that there's transparency, so that we know that members are acting in an upright and forthright manner all the time. And so, we don't want someone who has heavily invested, for example, a stock portfolio. They own $50,000 in a particular telecom portfolio, and then they're at the industry committee and they're pounding the table to make sure that telco would get special treatment. These rules and the disclosure rules that go along with it, all members' financial disclosures are available online. They give Canadians, they're meant to give Canadians confidence that members are there to do one thing only, and that's to serve Canadians, not to further their own private interests. And The commissioner is an independent officer of Parliament. So these findings are not, conservatives looking at a Liberal prime minister and saying, wow, look at all this political hay we can make by muddying the water. This is an independent officer of Parliament who is doing an investigation and tabling findings in the House of Commons. And so, while we did also have the Ethics Committee, of which I'm a member, we issued a report that was, scathing based on all of the reasons that I laid out.
Michael, I got to hate to interrupt. We come back. Let's talk about that. Welcome back to the Hill Update. I've got Michael Barrett, who is the Member of Parliament for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes. Michael, thanks for joining us on the show today. I know that you started talking about a report. So you are the Shadow Minister for Ethics, but you also sit on an Ethics Committee, which you'll look at a variety of things. So that's different from the Ethics Commissioner, which you just talked about as an independent House officer. So talk to us a bit about some of the reports you guys have done. I know you've just tabled a report in the last little while, the last week or so. Talk to us about some of the reports that the committee looks at overall, and maybe if you want to talk about the most recent report, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's different different functions of this committee, and it's not just to deal with investigating ethical lapses by the government. Of course, that is the one that we've most recently dealt with, and actually, in fact, today the committee tabled a different report on another subject, and that had to deal with the sharing of non-consensual images on certain platforms. And so, very interesting. I do encourage people to take a look at it. The committee does a lot of work, and these reports are very interesting. Those were the two biggest that we looked after so far in this Parliament. But with respect to this Ethics Committee report, Dean, if I can, I just share with your viewers some of the recommendations that the committee made, and maybe that will give them a sense of what this very long report speaks to. And I think the most important thing, one of the biggest takeaways, is that we recommended, our number one recommendation was that all cabinet decisions on awarding a contract or contribution agreement, we need to make sure that there's proper conflict of interest screens agreed upon pursuant to the Conflict of Interest Act. We need to make sure that there's ministerial accountability. We had ministers who misled the committee. We need to make sure that there's proper record keeping for these conversations. We saw that perhaps intentionally some records weren't well kept. But also the government was awarding $912 million in this contract, and they didn't do a due diligence report on, and were unable to produce it, on the party that they were going to be awarding the contract to. And so this is really about giving Canadians confidence in their public institutions. And so I won't list all 16 23 recommendations of the report, but certainly avoiding even the appearance of a conflict of interest is incredibly important, because Canadians want to be proud of their government, but they also need to have confidence that the government is acting in their best interest. So
what you're saying, if I heard you correctly, almost issuing contracts of up to $1 billion, just shy of $1 billion. You're saying no due diligence was done, or not enough due diligence? What were you suggesting there?
So the committee ordered the production of a due diligence report from the Privy Council office, and that's really the department, the Prime Minister's department. And they had said, well, we did our due diligence, and they said that often. We said, great, can you produce that report for us? And they were ordered by the committee. They were actually ordered by a majority of members in the House of Commons to produce it. They couldn't produce it because it didn't exist. And so 912 million taxpayer dollars, so nearly $1 billion, and they awarded the money to they awarded the contract to a shell company. And so that didn't hold any assets. Had that shell company obviously had no record in administering public funds, and that's incredibly concerning. So we need to. It's one thing, we've pointed out the mistake, and now all future governments need to look at that and learn from it, and be able to demonstrate that they've done their homework and exercise fiduciary responsibility when they're dealing with Canadians' hard-earned tax dollars.
Absolutely. We got about a minute left in the segment. Absolutely. We got about a minute left in the segment. Would that also include the contract that Frank Bayless got, the over $200 million? Was that also part of that due diligence process you talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's actually included in this report, the question of Bayless Medical. And again, it speaks to avoiding even the appearance of a conflict of interest. There can't be this perception that it's insiders who are being rewarded based on who they know in the government, not based on being the best and most affordable service provider for Canadians.
Perfect. Well, listen, what we'll do, when we come back, I think we should talk a little bit. We had a point of privilege this week, which was very unique and different regarding looking for documents from a certain committee. They weren't produced, and what happened was they were given to another committee. There's a whole bunch of insider baseball. I'm hoping that, Michael, when we come back from break, you can help us outline and make sense of what was asked for this week, why it wasn't given, and just some of the concerns about that as we move forward. So when we come back from break, we're going to talk about a point of order that we had this week around committee work and the request of documents. Welcome back to the Hill Update. Joining me on the show this week is Michael Barrett, who's the Member of Parliament for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes. Michael, once again, thanks for joining us on the show this week. You know, I thought given the time, I know this is not necessarily under your committee work, but I know you've spoken to it. So a unique thing happened. There was a committee of Parliament that requested documentation around an issue around the Winnipeg lab that was having some issues. A couple of people were walked out, and documents were requested, and basically the government said no, that we're not going to do that. We're not going to do it. And so there was this whole issue of a point of privilege that was raised. Why don't you just walk us through it? I know you had a chance to talk about it in the last couple of days. Walk us through the process of what was requested and what did not show up and what the Speaker had to say.
Yeah, so we have an issue where, well, let me take one quick step back. The Parliament has the ability to send for persons and papers. And so the precedent is, and the established law is that that committees of Parliament and Parliament can issue summons for people to appear and to testify, and for documents, and can request documents. And really, there is no limit on it, but parliamentarians are, of course, encouraged to exercise great caution when doing so. So we have this issue of this level 4 microbiology lab in Winnipeg, and we found out that 2 scientists were escorted out of the lab by the RCMP, were fired, their security clearance revoked by CSIS after concerns were raised. We know this lab sent dangerous samples to a microbiology lab in Wuhan, China, and so there was a lot going on there. We know that one of the scientists was cooperating with the People's Liberation Army in China, their medical research bureau, and this synopsis does not do this very complex issue justice. But the Standing Committee on or Special Committee on Canada-China Relations ordered documents from the Public Health Agency of Canada to just kind of demystify, clear this issue up. And they ordered them twice, and it was unanimous. Members from all parties ordered them, and they were not given to the Committee on Redacted, and so they were ordered. And basically, the Speaker found that there was a prima facie case of privilege, which means that on its face, it looks like that someone had violated the privilege of the House, and so there was an order that was a motion was just passed today, and that's that. The Public Health Agency is found in contempt for its failure to comply with the order. This is a big deal, and that the president of the Public Health Agency of Canada is ordered to appear at the bar of the House of Commons. That means that there's a brass bar right when you walk into the chamber, and to be admonished by the Speaker of the House of Commons, and then to furnish the House with the documents that they failed to produce previously. So this is a really big deal. I don't think it's happened in more than 100 years to have a private citizen called like that. And frankly, we've got a government who has this culture of secrecy and unwillingness to comply with the rules. They act like the law doesn't apply to them. And they had a majority for 4 years. So if they didn't like certain laws, they could have changed them. But it's not about that. It's that they believe that the rules simply don't apply to them. So this issue, it's pretty significant, particularly in the context of people paying a lot more attention to the subject of viruses and the like in the context of COVID. And so we want to find out what happened there. I want to just note one final thing, Dean, and that's that there were concerns raised about national security when you're dealing with foreign affairs like this, and a provision of the motion requires that the documents aren't just released to the public. It's that they're going to be given to the parliamentary law clerk. Any issue concerning national security will be redacted from them, which is entirely appropriate. And then the information is made available to parliamentarians so that they can do their job and hold the executive branch of government to account. So it's really remarkable. It's consistent with precedent, but will set new precedent and something to watch for sure.
Well, Mr. Barrett, thank you for joining us this week, and we look forward to hearing more about what's going on. Thanks. Well, lots of questions and maybe not as many answers as we'd like. So I think in the coming weeks, we're hoping we'll get more answers. And so there's been lots of questions raised. We'll look forward to seeing those answers in the coming weeks and months. I'm Dean Allison. Thanks for joining us on the Hill Update this week.